Hi, everybody. Welcome to In the Can with Carmella Cann. We have three very special guests today, and we're going to talk about cancel culture.
Hey, if you do anything wrong in your life, and I find out about it, I'm going to try to take everything away from you. And I don't care when I find out. Could be today, tomorrow, 15, 20 years from now. If I find out, you're fucking finished. Who's that? That's you. That's what the audience sounds like to me. That's why I don't be coming out doing comedy all the time, because y'all niggas is the worst motherfuckers I've ever tried to entertain in my fucking life.
We have three very special guests today, and we're going to talk about cancel culture. Our guests today are Jean, Richard, and Ryan. So I'm going to start with Jean, who is a Democrat, lives in New York City, and was an elected official and belongs to the Downtown Progressive Party. Jean, when you hear the word cancel culture, what does that mean to you?
Well, currently, cancel culture, I Googled it just to make sure that I'm right about it. It's something that involves an action or spoken word that is unacceptable and making the person ostracized, boycotted, or shunned. That is the current definition of canceled. It actually comes from an old R&B record, Your Love is Canceled, which I didn't know till I went to Google. Thinking about it, as a child of the 60s, I can remember Cesar Chavez and, we didn't buy grapes. That was a boycott. But I think cancel culture has taken on a much different, a more serious meaning currently, where something is, with the internet, it's a much more powerful tool, much more powerful. Things have become weaponized, and I think it means something far more potent than in our day in terms of protest. So I'd be curious to see what the other panelists feel that means, because to ostracize, to boycott is one thing, but to shun, that's a little more serious.
Okay, thank you. Our next guest is Richard from Oregon. Richard, when you hear the word cancel culture today, what does that mean to you?
Well, cancel culture, and I kind of wrote it down so I could keep my thoughts straight. It's a cultural trend to silence, shame, and cancel another person's speech that may not be found to be acceptable to the person wanting that person to be silenced. It's a way of shaming and censoring people for what they are saying.
Okay, and our next guest, Ryan from New York City. Ryan, when you hear cancel culture in today's climate, what does that mean to you?
It's sort of progressed from, I think the initial impetus behind it was really trying to create accountability for people's actions and their words. But it's morphed into something completely different, which I think is almost extreme in a lot of ways. I hate using that word too liberally, but some of the memes and internet pieces that you mentioned, Jean, have definitely grown to a point where people cancel for almost anything, and that sort of cheapens the original intent behind it, I think, of holding people to account for their words and their actions, and takes it to a level of, like you said, Richard, of censoring them to a point where their free expression is limited, and I'm not a fan of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think it's one thing to boycott something, that's a choice. You know, if you wanted to not buy grapes in the 60s to get the word out about the lack of a unionized labor force in the fields, that's one thing. It's not going to affect you one way or the other. You can make a choice to buy the grapes or not buy the grapes. When you get to a situation where a speaker is visibly, physically prevented from speaking on a college campus because somebody doesn't like their viewpoint, that's a censorship that's far beyond, you know, free speech. And that's when things get canceled. And that is too far. That's pushing something too far. And that's when we have to stop and think, have we gone too far in extreme?
So, you know, thank you all. I just wanted to, so we all are clear of what the meaning is to you. Just to have a little bit more framing of today's show. When I talk about cancel culture, I'm talking everything from films and comedians to speech to the rewriting of history books, and the idea of certain statues coming down and so forth. You know, so it's a very broad topic that encompasses a couple of things. So I'm going to make a quote, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. You know, director Spielberg edited his film E.T., made in the 1980s, because I guess there were some people who had issues with the violence in it or the guns in it. I'm not exactly sure what was in the media, what people had issue with, but he did make some revisions. And he said after he made the revisions, I should never have messed with the archives of my work. I don't recommend anyone to do that. All our movies are a kind of sign point of where we were when we made them, what the world was like and what the world was receiving when we got those stories out there. So I really regret having them out there. So, you know, he basically edited it for modern sensitivity. Now, what are your thoughts? There's movies like Gone with the Wind and other similar films that have been called to be canceled because they portray, I guess, you know, a time where, you know, there was racism or considered racist. I mean, what are your thoughts, Jean, on should movies be taken off the shelf and canceled?
Absolutely not. I'm a playwright, and I was shocked when the Dr. Seuss books were removed. I have them in my daughter's library, you know, and I treasure them. We have to put things in context, you know, when they were written. And I would never edit something that was done at a particular time. You have to understand the era in which something was written, and that's how we learn. I mean, I remember when I was not allowed, I was a senior in high school, and I went to an accelerated class at the university, my senior year in high school, and I was not allowed to do a paper on the Grapes of Wrath because the word breast was in the book. And I said, I'm going to read it anyway. And she said, if you read it, the English teacher said to me, if you read it, I'm going to give you a C, which she did, which wrecked my grade. But I read it anyway, but it wasn't removed. It was not removed from the whole curriculum because that word breast was in there. Now they take the book out, so nobody can read it. That is censorship beyond the pale, and that's where we are now, and that's very, very scary. I think we're saying to the world and saying to, well, you people in the United States, you are not big enough to read real things, and that's very, very scary.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Richard, when you hear this quote from director Spielberg, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with him or not?
I don't think anything that's been produced or created should be changed later on. In some cases, I suppose, if there's a revival and a reissue of a work of art, and you can make it contemporary, that might be a little bit different. But films like Gone with the Wind, there's just many films. That's just one of them. Those should not be changed. It's when they were created. You know, they were created during a certain time, and people need to be educated. We need to educate our young people to understand what that's about, that things occur in different times, and not go back and try and reconfigure something simply because someone is offended. You know, we not only have cancel culture, we have a culture of being offended, being completely offended all the time by everything. And this is what's driving a lot of this, going back and wanting to change works of art, wanting to topple statues, and that sort of thing.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on certain movies? Should they be re-edited or not, or taken off the shelf, or
No, absolutely not. I think it's important to contextualize things, and I see no issue with like providing a disclaimer or some sort of like, hey, this was produced by this day or in this context of an era. But when you start whitewashing things and eliminating them from the zeitgeist, you lead us towards a place of the culture could forget them and what happened. Ultimately, history does repeat itself. So if you don't have the guardrails in place to understand that this happened in the past, there's no proof of it, it could be completely eliminated. I mean, that's typically how a lot of cultures, when they did conquer in the past, they would go right for the art, eliminate it, destroy it. And that ultimately led them to be able to take the pieces that they liked, for instance, Christianity, and they took the pagan rituals, like having a tree in the house and whatnot, destroyed the meaning behind that, and turned it into an attachment to their religion in order to erase it from everyone's mind. So I think it's important to keep all of that and to have that understanding and to carry that forward, so that we as a culture and as a race, a human race, can grow and learn from it and not repeat those mistakes.
Okay. I'm going to stay on the topic a little bit of artists, and also get a little bit more into organizations and the role organizations play. Netflix was going to have a boycott on trans employees, I believe, who were transgender, who were against one of the content.
I am not saying that to say that trans women aren't women. I am just saying that those pussies that they got, you know what I mean? I'm not saying it's not pussy, but that's like beyond pussy or impossible pussy. You know what I mean? It tastes like pussy, but that's not quite what it is it? It's not blood, that's beet juice.
But the network kind of pushed back on the employees and said, we value our trans colleagues and allies and understand the deep hurt that's been caused. We respect the decision of any employee who chooses to walk out, and recognize we have much more work to do both in Netflix and our content. But they also moved on to say, had a new message for its employees: be prepared to work on content you may not agree with. And if you don't like that, you can quit. In an update to its culture guidelines, the Strengthening Giant added a section called Artistic Expression, which details how the company offers an array of programming for many audiences. So, there has been a call for certain artists to be canceled because people don't like their messaging or don't like their comedy or feel like there may be transphobia in it. And Netflix kind of pushed back on its employees and said, if you don't like it, then you can quit. But there's audiences who like different things. Jean, I know you mentioned you're a playwright. What are your thoughts when an organization does that? Do you think that the organization is correct, or
I will tell you, there's a huge discussion going on among comedians about the fact that comedy is the one area where there should be anything goes. I mean, the fact that they're trying to now tell comedians you can say this, you can't say that. I mean, that, the art is the one area where you should offend. I mean, you should be able to, say, do whatever. I mean, it really is frightening to think about I mean, it can be awful, it can be terrible, but it should be allowed. I mean, that's what the First Amendment is all about. And it's not always going to be good. I mean, everybody quotes James Joyce. Well, he was great, but there's some lousy comics out there too that are really bad, but they should be allowed to say what they want to say. And I think we're on dangerous ground when you have a network like Netflix and say, well, you can quit if you don't like, what we're doing. They should explain the First Amendment to the people that they're dealing with. We're abiding by the First Amendment. And it's a paid service, so you don't have to watch it. But we should be allowed to see what people. I love Dave Chappelle, and I'm a big fan of raunchy comedians. I have a dear girlfriend who is a comedian, and I followed her career, and I've sat through some really bad comics to watch her perform. She's a great comic. But there's got to be that liberty that, we can do whatever, we want. Now, when you get into the area of personal freedom, in other words, when you step into the area of physical interaction, we're talking words are one thing. When something happens between two people, that's something else. But in terms of words, in terms of what people say in a routine, I say anything goes. And it's very dangerous when people try to say to people, you cannot say this, you cannot go there. We're on very dangerous ground. That's what the First Amendment is all about.
No, I absolutely agree with you. As someone who is a comedian myself and worked as an improv comic for many years when I hosted in clubs, I'm very frightened of today's times where, as a comedian, you're really taking the risk of people being easily offended by everything. And one of the great things, some of the greatest comedians I know, make fun of all types of groups of people, Joan Rivers and some other people I've admired. And it's quite, I haven't worked recently in the comedy arena, but it's crossed my mind where I'm like, I'm kind of scared to step on stage because I'm not the most politically correct person as a comedian. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be censored, and I don't want to be stifled, mm-hmm. my art, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So it is concerning that, and a lot of, like you said, specifically comedians are, scared because people want to cancel them first. It's a major issue. Yeah. But, I want to broaden it up, not just to comedians, but to writers and to directors. You may have a point of view that may offend some other people. Do you have the right to show your art? And organizations in this situation with Netflix, they pushed back on employees and said, well, if you don't like it, you can quit. But there's a lot of audiences out there for different types of products. Mm-hmm. Ryan, what is your thoughts on Netflix action?
Well, so first of all, I think they were right to say we have content across the board, and you can take it or leave it, because Netflix's purpose is to appeal to the widest audience possible. They're not a niche platform. They their whole pitch is scale, right? The more people they have watching their content, the more successful they are, the more money they make. They're in it for the money, nothing more. I think it's not really a First Amendment argument, because the First Amendment only applies to the government. Congress shall not make any laws to restrict the exercise of freedom of the press, etc. Businesses are entitled to make those rules no matter what they choose, I think. But I think they made the right call for their own business purposes. A right-wing leading organization like Fox News, for instance, if they wanted to say we don't want to have any liberal commentators, like, that's their right. They could say that. I wouldn't agree with it, but as a business and a private entity, it's more than acceptable for them to do so. I think the invitation for employees to quit if they don't like it is a little bit short-sighted. I'm not sure that the employees are being the most responsible or level-headed when they get into an uproar, unless it's like content that's saying, oh, go kill all the trans people, because then in a sense that would probably be a little bit over the line of what should be acceptable. But I actually saw that special that was under contention, and I didn't find it to be expressly attacking. It was more along the lines of like using a comedic perspective to work through those thoughts and understand it. And you know, maybe some people don't like it, but I do think it has value and it should be included.
So I move on to the next question. You know, organizations, there's also a call to boycott and kind of cancel organizations if you don't like organizations, the marketing technique. You know, several months ago, Bud Light had a trans influencer who was promoting, Bud Light. And there was a call from many on the right wing side to boycott Bud Light because they decided to basically market to a new demographic of LGBTQ people. Richard, what are your thoughts on this now? Like, companies kind of, you know, there's these boycotts that are, certain companies are being targeted because people disagree with their marketing strategy.
Well, I think the boycotts can send a message to the company about what they like or don't like. And Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch was perfectly within its rights to hire the trans activist. I can't think of her first name, Mulvaney.
Dylan Mulvaney. Yeah.
Dylan Mulvaney they had every right to hire her. But customers have every right to boycott that decision and say, I don't like it. And, I don't know if I don't think that's necessarily cancel culture at all. It's just choosing what you like and what you don't like.
Mhm.
You know, there are some aspects of other companies that I may not care for. Nike is one of them. They make great shoes, but I have some issues with some of their policies. So it's up to the customer. And companies should listen to their customers. They may have a responsibility to the people they put forth in their advertisements, but they also have a responsibility to their customers and to their bottom line. And they have to.
I mean, do you feel like companies should get political? I mean, should take political positions or not?
No, they should not.
Ryan, what are your thoughts
They do
on
so
that?
at their peril, obviously.
I mean, you think about Disney that took a political position, mostly driven by its employees, of course, and ended up in this war with Ron DeSantis. As stakeholders in Disney, think about, like, is that in organizations, should organizations be doing that? Or because a lot of times these positions are driven by the employees within, and stakeholders are being put at risk of their stock going down and so forth. Jean, what are your thoughts there? As
I was just thinking as I was listening to our other commentators speak. There's ways to do things to educate the public. And I've noticed recently in some of the different advertisements that I've seen, a very subtle way of introducing different lifestyles, where all of a sudden I'm seeing two men embrace, two women, but it's done in a very careful kind of mixture of different lifestyles. It's not in your face. And I think the Bud Light rollout was so blatant, it was like calling people to maybe take them on. And maybe they thought that was a good way to introduce what Bud Light was doing. And it rattled some people, and Bud Light paid a price. I mean, that boycott was very effective.
Jean, why do you think that it rattles people?
Well, because from what I can understand, from what I know about it, from just reading about it, was that Anheuser-Busch announced that this person who was touting the drink was a trans person, and I think that was a call to the people who would find that offensive to take action. I think some of the other commercials that I've been seeing, you see all of a sudden you see different types of people, and you notice, oh, that's a gay couple, and that's maybe a trans person. I think we need to be, we can be educators and embracing different lifestyles in a way, particularly if you are selling something, to do it in a way that educates people without necessarily, because you're a marketer. You have to be careful. And it seemed to me that Bud Light really handled that very badly.
I'd take a different approach on that. I feel like it wasn't that severe. It was basically, they sent her a can of Bud Light that had her face printed on it. It was like a custom made one. And she took an Instagram selfie with it and posted it to her Instagram. And that was it. The right wing took that and blew it up as though Bud Light was doing a huge campaign behind trans activists and whatnot, which, the right-wing powerhouse is pretty good at spinning things out of control and whipping up a frenzy.
Maybe they were waiting for that, which is
I think it's a little bit ironic and silly that a lot of the protest and boycott around Bud Light shifted to other brands that are actually owned by AB InBev and have been marketing to LGBTQ audiences for decades. I've worked in gay media before, and pretty much every alcohol and beer company has at some point run a campaign targeted to LGBTQ individuals in my career.
Yeah.
But they're not focusing on that. They're not boycotting those. I think this is a case of the right wing seizing an opportunity to create something out of nothing, and it worked. Got them a whole lot more eyeballs, got them a lot more attention, and unfortunately for Bud Light, they definitely received some backlash. I think they got a lot of backlash from the gay community as well because of their response to it. If you do target LGBTQ people and go back on that support at some point, you've immediately made enemies of them. So I'm curious to see how that comes back in the future, but yeah.
I mean, I didn't think anything was wrong with the company. I feel like this is a war on the transgender community. God forbid that a company hire a transgender person to be in a commercial or market their product and be inclusive of everyone on the LGBTQ. Now they have to be concerned with the right going after them because they're hiring a trans person, which is a little bit disturbing. I mean, I did see some of other brands that Dylan Mulvaney was, sponsored. One of them was Nike. And I did see a clip for it, and I did understand why maybe some women would have a problem with it. Dylan Mulvaney comes out off as this campy type of person. And I think women kind of took that the wrong way, that he was kind of over elaborating feminism or being girly sort of meant. And I think women have fought against certain types of stereotypes, and he kind of was blowing the stereotype up in the way he was presenting himself. So I definitely can see why that people may have been bothered by that, because but there's now this call where if people don't like something, there's a call to want to cancel it all the time.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the point. I want to move on to our next thing. You guys were talking about freedom of speech earlier, and J.K. Rowling has been vocal on some positions on what she feels trans issues are, and has also made some tweets. Because of a lot of people calling her transphobic, people have asked to boycott. I believe she has a new show coming out that's based on her book, The Harry Potter.
And they've canceled people that are more powerful than me. They canceled J.K. Rowling. My God, J.K. Rowling wrote all the Harry Potter books by herself. She sold so many books, the Bible worries about her. And they canceled her because she said in an interview, and this is not exactly what she said, but effectually, she said gender was a fact. And then the trans community got mad as shit. They started calling her a TERF. I didn't even know what the fuck that was. But I know that trans people make up words to win arguments. So I looked it up. TERF is an acronym. Stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. This is a real thing. This is a group of women that hate transgender. They don't hate transgender women, but they look at trans women the way we blacks might look at blackface. It offends them. Like, ooh, this bitch is doing an impression of me.
What are your thoughts, Jean, when you have someone like, Rowling, who basically made a tweet that she doesn't, I believe, see trans women as women. She has a different perspective on it. That now she's being called transphobic, and people are saying that they should boycott her work.
Again, this pits the author against the work, and Harry Potter was a wonderful series, and Rowling may have some wrong ideas about, at least in my mind, about gendered people. I think of how much I love Willy Wonka, and I understand Roald Dahl could be sometimes a horrible person. That doesn't affect my love for what he did as an artist. Again, you can't mix up those two things. A work of art is a work of art, and in my mind, so it doesn't affect the book that she created, which are masterpieces. I mean, it got a ton of people to read over and over and over and over again, the whole Harry Potter series. So she may say some dumb things about trans people, maybe some uneducated things about trans people, and she's welcome to say it, freedom of speech, but it doesn't affect the fact that she wrote some amazing stuff. And maybe when she meets some more trans women, she'll change her mind. I know some, and I'm very close to some, and it's a delightful experience. This is all an educational process. So
I mean, to elaborate a little bit more, J.K. Rowling says that she supports the transgender community. Mm-hmm. She just doesn't agree with certain parts of it. And, for instance, one of her tweets were, if sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived realities of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erase the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It is in hate to speak the truth. So, Richard, what are your thoughts? This is her opinion. Is she entitled to an opinion? And because she's entitled to one, should she be boycotted now because and kind of canceled from culture because she made a statement?
No,
What her thoughts are.
I've heard most of the statements that she's made. I happen to agree with her on the statements that she's made. And she was, in my opinion, telling the truth. She wasn't slamming trans individuals. And I think a lot of it, she's reacting to a lot of the trans movement's radicalism. The trans movement is very radical. It's not even, in many cases, in my opinion, about trans individuals who need lots of support. So I support what she said. I don't find it offensive at all. As for Harry Potter, that's a work that stands on its own artistic merit, and people should not be boycotting Harry Potter. If that were the case, we'd be boycotting a lot of famous composers because, you know, they sided with the Nazis or something like that. There were a couple German composers who did that, but we still play their music. So I think we have to be very careful who we're wanting to boycott and why.
You know, yeah, I do think that we're getting to a place where, people have to be scared what they say. I love Bill Maher, and he kind of makes reference to what he calls the woke. And he talks about this, all of a sudden you don't like what someone says and you're offended, you want to, cancel them, so to speak. J.K. Rowling is an example of that. So, Ryan, what are your thoughts on the fact that, she just has an opinion? She's not saying she doesn't support trans people. She just doesn't believe trans women are women. She believes they should have their own lane. And isn't she entitled to her viewpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's entitled to their viewpoint. And I sort of think it's a little bit extreme to be so aggressively anti everything she's ever created because of some comments she made. Like Jean was saying, it's possible she just is not fully educated around what's happening. I don't know that I agree with Richard's assessment that the trans movement is extreme, or radical rather. I think that's the term you used. I think it's more along the lines of just people trying to gain acceptance and protection and stop being murdered for living their lives and their truth. If that's radical, I mean, consider me a radical, because I don't want someone killing me because of who I am. I think that we should respect the art for art's sake and take it for what it is. And, you can't fully separate the person who created it, but like both of them said, it's a little bit short-sighted to eliminate the art just because of that or who the person was. There are plenty of artists who have said and done horrible things throughout history that have created masterpieces. So,
all right, I'm gonna have one more question. I'm gonna move away from artists and now move to kind of statues and American figures that we upheld over many decades. The call to remove statues or to rewrite things based on what Jim Marr did an episode called The War on the Western Civilization. Jean, what are your thoughts? Should we be taking statues down like Christopher Columbus and other statues because people find it offensive? The fact that, he was a slave owner.
I'm really of two minds about the statues, actually. As an Italian American, I feel very close to Christopher Columbus, not as, I understand that he, invaded a country and created real problems for the indigenous people that were there. But I don't see why the indigenous people cannot be celebrated in their own right as they should be. But I don't see why Columbus, for the navigational skills that he had, cannot also be celebrated. So I would not take down the beautiful Columbus statue that the Italian Americans paid for with their dimes and nickels over the years in Columbus Square. But I understand the two thoughts that go on there. On the other side, I visited my daughter in Louisville, Kentucky many years ago, and I was a little stunned to see all this Confederate statues that were up and celebrating the victory in the Civil War. And I went, wait a minute, didn't the North triumph there? So it did take me aback. And there is something to be said, when you found out that all these army posts were named after defeated Southern generals, and history was kind of flipped on its head. So you have to somehow say to yourself, how can we correct the historical record? So I'm really of two minds. I want to honor history by giving indigenous people their due, but I want the people who paid for those that Columbus statue to have that statue remain. But I don't want to see the South continue to honor slave owners and Southern generals without recognizing that the Civil War, in fact, was won by those opposing slavery. So I can see a rationale for taking some statues down. I can see a rationale for not putting up on a pedestal people who owned slaves and people who fought to keep slavery. So as I said, I'm of two minds about when statues come down and when statues stay up.
I mean, what are your thoughts, Richard? Should we be taking statues down or replacing them? There's, not to quote President Trump, but he talks about there's this indoctrination to hate America. And there's a grain of truth that is in that statement, in the new modern thinking. And, what are your thoughts, Richard, in terms of?
Well, I agree with that. I think there's a lot of hatred of America, and we have to beat our breasts and say, oh, we're such a bad country and we had slavery. We ended slavery. We ended slavery. The British did it before we did, but we ended it for ourselves. And as far as statues, I'm not a big fan of knocking over statues. You look at history, the way to deal with history is to really study it instead of just knocking the statue down. I mean, there's statues of George Washington. Unfortunately, here in Portland, a beautiful statue of George Washington was toppled 2 years ago by Antifa, and I don't think it's been rebuilt. And George Washington was a fervent slave owner. Does that take away from what he did to help create this country? He also had misgivings about slavery, as did Jefferson and many of the other founding fathers. There might be a solution for a lot of these statues. If you don't want them in the public square, you can always move them to a special park or an area where one can look at history like that without having them perhaps right in the public square. But just destroying them is not an answer. Not an answer at all.
And Ryan, finally, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with both of them on points. I definitely don't think they should be destroyed, just like Richard said. And I see value in moving them to museums so that the history can be presented in context with what the statue is for. But growing up in the South, I'm originally from Louisiana, so I've grown up with those Confederate monuments everywhere, areas named after Confederate generals, the flag flying, in public squares and whatnot, people driving around with them. So it's very clear that a lot of them were erected to essentially, in a subversive way, say to minorities, you are not free. You are still under our thumb. Don't get it twisted. And I think the movement emerged from a need to move past that and essentially give people growing up in these environments the freedom from having that underlying pulse in everything they do. Changing those monuments out for leaders that aren't so problematic or include points of history that may not be based on just trying to keep one race or type of person down. I don't see anything wrong with that, but I do think that we should still value that piece and time, if for nothing, at least for the educational purposes, and move them into a museum with that context.
Carmella,
I grew up in a time.
Can I just tell one story quickly about statues? I was down many, many years ago to Dothan, Alabama, to visit a family member who had moved down there. And they were all excited about showing me town square, statue of a bug. And it was the beetle. And they were honoring the beetle because the beetle had caused the demise of cotton and the creation of using the peanut as a farming product. They completely ignored George Washington Carver, the Black man who figured out that you could grow peanuts and make a living. They rather had the boll weevil up on a statue than put George Washington Carver. And I will never forget that they put up a statue of a bug rather than the Black man who created the use of the peanut.
And I think that's the subtext that we all need to remember with a lot of this, is that, they were erected to give that little bit of ding. So
I was just amazed.
Yeah, and I mean, to comment on it, I agree with Jean. There's pros and cons. I remember going to Nashville in several years ago and driving down a main highway, and I asked my friend, there was a statue of a civil leader, and she goes, "Oh, that's the founder of the KKK." And I was stunned that they had this on the main highway. And definitely was like, "Oh wow, aren't people bothered by this?" So I see that certain things can, be triggering to some people, and the need to maybe take some of those things down. But on the other level, I also agree with something Richard said, which is, there is an idea of learning from our history, even if there's negativity, and seeing how far we've come as a society. And I'm not for this "I hate America" thought process that sometimes is out there. I know recently I mentioned Thanksgiving to a friend, and I love Thanksgiving, and it was thought because of the invading of indigenous people, it's like, oh, we should abolish Thanksgiving now and no longer celebrate it. There is this idea out there. And I grew up in a time where you were taught to be proud to be an American, and there was pride in all of those things. And I don't feel that we have that in today's environment in the new generation. But this has been an interesting conversation. I do thank all three of you for participating. Thank you, audience, for tuning in to our cancel culture episode. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. And we look forward to bringing you some new work.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all.
Nice to
Have
meet
a
you.
good night. Hi, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can get more episodes of In the Can with Carmella Cann.